The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel didn't just smell like flowers. It smelled like old money and silent judgment. Thousands of white hydrangeas had been imported from Holland that morning, filling the air with a scent that was sweet, heavy, and suffocating. The crystal chandeliers overhead didn't just twinkle, they glared, casting a harsh, diamond-bright light on the 300 guests below. I sat at the head table, forcing my hands to stop trembling. I adjusted the cufflinks on my tuxedo for the 10th time. It was a rental. A high-end rental, sure, Vera Wong black, but a rental nonetheless. Beside me, Sarah looked like an angel carved out of marble and lace. Her dress was a custom Oscar de la Renta that cost more than my parents made in a year. She was radiant, smiling at her cousins, waving to her college friends. But under the table, her hand was gripping mine so tight her knuckles were white. "Just breathe," she whispered, leaning in so her lips brushed my ear. "It's almost over. Just the speeches, the cake, and then we can escape." I squeezed her hand back. "I love you, Sarah. I love you too, Mark. Ignore him. Please. Just for tonight. Him." Across the room, sitting at the parents' table like a feudal lord holding court, was her father. Richard Sterling. He was wearing a bespoke Tom Ford suit that shimmered under the lights. He was laughing loudly at something a senator was saying, swirling his 30-year-old scotch, looking everywhere except at me. For 5 years, Richard Sterling had looked everywhere except at me. To him, I wasn't Mark. I was Mark the freelancer. Mark the dreamer. Or, his favorite nickname when he thought I couldn't hear, Mark the mistake. My mind drifted back to the first time I met him. It was Thanksgiving, 4 years ago. I had driven my beat-up 2012 Honda Civic to their estate in Connecticut. The muffler was loose, and it rattled like a machine gun as I pulled up the long, gravel driveway lined with Bentleys and Range Rovers. Richard had been standing on the porch. He didn't shake my hand. He just looked at the car, then at me, and said, "Service entrance is around the back." When Sarah corrected him, telling him I was her boyfriend, he didn't apologize. He just laughed. "Oh. I assumed you were the caterer. You have that hungry look." I took it. I took every snide comment about my little computer games. I took the way he would offer to pay for dinner with a pitying smile, saying, "Put your wallet away, Mark. We know things are tight." I took it because I loved Sarah. And because I had a secret. A secret so big, so heavy, that it felt like carrying a nuclear bomb in my chest pocket. Tonight was supposed to be a ceasefire. It was our wedding day. But the truce was about to break. I could feel it in the air, thick as the humidity before a thunderstorm. The string quartet stopped playing. The room went silent. The murmur of conversation died down. Richard stood up. He didn't need a glass to tap, his presence demanded attention. He walked to the microphone stand in the center of the dance floor. The spotlight hit him. He soaked it up, a narcissist in his natural habitat. "Good evening, everyone," Richard boomed. His voice was smooth as silk and cold as ice. "For those who don't know me, I'm Richard. Sarah's father. And the man who wrote the check for this lovely evening." A ripple of polite laughter went through the crowd. I felt Sarah stiffen beside me. I hadn't let him pay for it. Sarah knew that. But Richard had to claim the glory. He needed everyone in this room to know that he was the provider. The king. "I look at my daughter tonight," Richard continued, turning to look at Sarah with genuine affection. "And I see perfection. Beauty. Grace. Intelligence. She is a Sterling, through and through." He paused. He took a sip of his champagne. He turned his gaze to me. The warmth vanished from his eyes. It was replaced by a look of flat, unadulterated disappointment. It was the look you give a waiter who brought you the wrong order. And then, Richard sighed into the microphone, "I look at Mark. The room got quiet. Not the respectful quiet of a toast. The awkward, terrified quiet of a car crash happening in slow motion. Guests shifted in their seats. The senator cleared his throat. "Mark," Richard said my name like it was a bad taste in his mouth. "When Sarah first brought you home, I admit, I was concerned. You were wearing a t-shirt. You drove a car that sounded like a lawnmower. You told me you were building something. A coder. A freelancer." He chuckled darkly. "I remember telling Sarah, honey, puppies are cute, but you don't marry them. I wanted a lion for my daughter. A king. Someone who could give her the world she deserves. The world I gave her." I stared at the white tablecloth. I could feel the eyes of 300 guests boring into me. Pity. Amusement. Shock. I saw Sarah's cousin smirking. I saw my own mother, sitting at a table in the back, looking down at her hands, humiliated. But, Richard shrugged, swirling his champagne. "Sarah is stubborn. She chose, love. Or whatever this is. She chose the struggling artist route. And I respect her charity. Really, I do. Charity. He called our marriage charity." Sarah started to stand up. "Dad, stop," she hissed. "Sit down, sweetheart, I'm toasting," Richard snapped, asserting dominance. He looked back at me. "Mark, look at me." I looked up. I locked eyes with him. I didn't blink. "I'm going to be honest, because we're family now," Richard said, his smile tight and cruel. "I think you're a loser. I think you have no ambition. I think you're going to drag my daughter down into a life of mediocrity and coupons. I think 10 years from now, she's going to wake up in a rental apartment and resent you. And when that happens, her room at my house is always ready." A collective gasp went through the room. A woman at table 5 dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Richard raised his glass high. "So, here's to Sarah. May she find happiness, eventually. And here's to Mark. May you try your best. God knows you'll need the luck." He drank. He didn't toast to us. He didn't toast to the couple. He toasted to his daughter's eventual divorce. Richard dropped the microphone back into the stand with a thud. He walked back to his table, looking satisfied, like a man who had just delivered a hard truth that needed to be said. He sat down, high-fived the senator, and laughed. Sarah was crying. Silent, hot tears streaming down her flawless makeup. She squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I hate him. We're leaving. We're leaving right now." I looked at her. I wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "No," I said softly. "Mark, please. He humiliated you. I can't stay here." "We aren't leaving, Sarah," I said. I turned to look at the best man, who was sitting to my left. Jason. Jason wasn't just my best friend from college. Jason was my CFO. He was the only person in this room, besides the IRS, who knew the truth. He was wearing a suit that he actually owned, a bespoke Italian cut that cost $5,000, and he was looking at Richard with the predatory focus of a velociraptor eyeing a wounded goat. Jason had a folder on the table next to his champagne glass. A thick, blue folder. "Is it time?" Jason asked me quietly. I looked at Richard, who was now laughing with his buddies, ignoring the devastation he had caused. I looked at my crying wife. I looked at my mother in the back. "Yes," I said. "Burn it down." Jason stood up. He didn't tap his glass. He didn't ask for attention. He simply walked to the microphone, picked it up, and waited. The silence in the room changed. It went from awkward to electric. Jason had a presence. He didn't look like a groomsman anymore. He looked like an executioner. "Good evening," Jason said. His voice was deeper than Richard's, steadier. "For those who don't know me, I'm Jason. I'm Mark's best man. I'm also his business partner." Richard snorted loudly from his table. "Business partner? What, do you guys sell lemonade together?" Some of Richard's sycophants laughed. Jason didn't smile. He didn't blink. He turned slowly to face Richard. "Actually, Richard," Jason said, opening the blue folder on the podium. "We sell artificial intelligence infrastructure to the Department of Defense and Fortune 500 companies. But I can see how you might have missed that. You were too busy looking at Mark's t-shirt to notice the patent he was filing on his phone." The laughter died instantly. "I wasn't going to do this," Jason continued, his voice echoing in the hall. "Mark is a humble guy. He likes his privacy. He didn't want you to know. He wanted you to respect him for the man he is, not the wallet he carries. He spent 5 years waiting for you to be a decent human being." Jason looked around the room. "But after that speech? After calling the groom a loser at his own wedding? I think the non-disclosure agreement has just expired." Jason pulled a piece of paper from the folder. "Richard, you work for Apex Logistics, don't you? You're a senior vice president." Richard frowned, looking confused. "Yes. I run the Eastern Seaboard Division." "What of it?" "It's a good company," Jason nodded. "Struggling a bit in Q3, though. Supply chain issues. Stock is down 15%. Management is panic selling. That is proprietary information." Richard shouted, standing up. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the guy who signed the check this morning," Jason said casually. "What check?" "The acquisition check," Jason smiled. A cold, shark-like smile. "At 9 a.m. today, a holding company called Helix Ventures purchased 51% of Apex Logistics. It was a hostile takeover. We bought the controlling stake on the open market." Richard went pale. "Helix Ventures? I've heard of them. They're a tech giant. What does that have to do with you?" Jason pointed at me. "Mark isn't a freelancer, Richard," Jason said. "Mark is the founder and CEO of Helix Ventures. He built the algorithm that runs your company's logistics software. He doesn't just work for you. As of this morning, he owns you." The silence in the Plaza Hotel ballroom was heavy, physical. It pressed down on the 300 guests like a lead blanket. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the sharp, ragged breathing of Richard Sterling. "That's a lie," Richard stammered, his voice losing its booming projection. "Helix Ventures is a unicorn startup out of Silicon Valley. Mark drives a Honda." Jason smiled. He picked up his champagne glass, took a slow sip, and set it down. "Mark drives a Honda because he likes the gas mileage, Richard," Jason said into the microphone. "And he owns the company." Jason flipped a page in the blue folder. "So, in the spirit of transparency, and because I'm the CFO of Helix Ventures, I thought we should clarify the financial standing of the Groom." Jason pulled out a document stamped with a bank logo. He held it up. "This is the quarterly valuation of Mark's equity stake in Helix," Jason read aloud. "As of market close yesterday, Mark's personal net worth is valued at $850 million. A gasp tore through the room. It wasn't a ripple this time, it was a tidal wave. People turned to look at me. The freelancer. The guy in the rented tux. I kept my face impassive. I squeezed Sarah's hand. She was staring at me, her eyes wide, but not with greed, with shock. She knew I had money, but she didn't know I had empire money. 8. Richard whispered, clutching the back of his chair for support. 800 million. Give or take, Jason shrugged. Market fluctuates. But here's the interesting part, Richard. Mark didn't want you to know. Do you know why? Jason leaned into the mic. Because he wanted to know if you would respect him without the checkbook. He wanted to be part of this family because he loves your daughter, not because he wanted to buy his way in. He waited 5 years for a kind word. A good job. A handshake. Jason looked at Richard with pure disgust. And tonight, you gave him a public flogging instead. Richard tried to rally. He straightened his tie, his narcissism fighting for survival. Fine, he snapped, trying to regain the room. So he got lucky with some tech lottery ticket. Good for him. That doesn't change the fact that I am the provider here. I paid for this wedding. I have supported this family for 30 years. I am the patriarch. Are you? Jason asked softly. He flipped another page in the folder. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. You see, Richard, Jason said, his voice dropping to a clinical, professional tone. When Mark decided to acquire Apex Logistics this morning to save it from bankruptcy, we had to do a due diligence audit. Not just on the company. On the executive officers. That includes you. Richard's eyes bulged. You audited me. We found some interesting things, Jason said. You talk a lot about providers and mediocrity. You mocked Mark for being poor. But according to these credit reports. Jason pulled out a sheet of paper full of red ink. Richard Sterling. Assets. The house in the Hamptons. Mortgage to the hilt. Second and third liens recorded last year. The Bentley. Leased. The investment portfolio. Liquidated 6 months ago to cover margin calls. Jason looked up. You're broke, Richard. Actually, worse. You're insolvent. You've been living on credit cards and payday loans to keep up the appearance of being a king while drowning in debt. The guests were whispering frantically now. The senator at Richard's table slowly moved his chair away, creating distance. Lies. Richard screamed, sweat pouring down his face. I paid for this wedding. $100,000. I wrote the check. Ah, yes. The wedding, Jason pulled out a photocopy of a check. The check you wrote to the Plaza Hotel last week. He held it up. It bounced, Richard. Insufficient funds. The room gasped again. This was the ultimate social death. Bouncing a check at the plaza. But, Jason continued, looking at me with a small smile. The wedding wasn't cancelled. Why? Because the plaza received a wire transfer an hour later to cover the balance. Plus a tip for the inconvenience. Jason looked back at Richard. Guess who sent the wire? Richard looked at me. His face crumbled. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the terrified realization of a man who had just been caught naked. Mark paid for it, Jason said. Mark paid for his own wedding, anonymously, so you could stand up here and pretend to be the big man. So you could take the credit. He did it to protect Sarah from the shame of knowing her father is a fraud. I stood up then. Slowly. The room went deadly silent. I looked at Sarah. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the money earlier, I whispered to her. I wanted us to be us. She touched my face, tears streaming down her cheeks. You paid for everything. To save his ego. I did it for you, I said. Then, I turned to Richard. I didn't use a microphone. I didn't need one. Richard, I said, my voice carrying across the quiet hall. You called me a loser. You said I would drag Sarah down. But the truth is, I've been holding you up for 2 years. 2 years. Richard whispered. Who do you think bought the bad debt from your company in 2023 to stop the layoffs? I asked. Who do you think anonymously donated to your wife's charity gala so you wouldn't look cheap? Who paid off the lien on your Hamptons house so the bank wouldn't foreclose last Christmas? I took a step toward him. It was me. The freelancer. The mistake. I've spent $2 million keeping your house of cards from falling over. Not because I like you. But because Sarah loves the Hamptons house. And I didn't want her to lose her childhood home because her father has a gambling problem with the stock market. Richard slumped into his chair. He looked small. Defeated. The king was dead. I looked at Jason. Thank you, Jason. I think that covers the toast. Jason nodded, closed the blue folder, and tossed it onto the table in front of Richard. It landed with a heavy slap next to his empty scotch glass. To the groom, Jason said, raising his glass one last time. To the groom. The crowd roared back, the sound deafening. They weren't cheering for the wedding anymore. They were cheering for the execution. But it wasn't over. Because Richard, in his desperation, made one last, fatal mistake. He stood up, shaking, his face twisted in a snarl of humiliation. You think you can buy me? He spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. You think money makes you a man? You're still nothing. You manipulated my daughter. You hid who you were. Sarah, are you going to let him humiliate your father like this? I forbid this marriage. I forbid it. He looked at Sarah, expecting obedience. Expecting the little girl he had controlled for 25 years. Sarah stood up. She looked like a queen. She looked at the man who had just called her husband a loser. She picked up her glass of champagne. And she threw it in Richard's face. The champagne dripped from Richard's nose. It soaked into his expensive Tom Ford lapel. He stood frozen, his eyes blinking rapidly against the sting of the alcohol. The room was so quiet you could hear the liquid hitting the floor. Drip. 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 Sarah lowered her glass. Her hand wasn't shaking anymore. She looked calm. Terrifyingly calm. You forbid it? She repeated, her voice cutting through the air like a razor wire. You think you have the right to forbid anything? After what you just did? Sarah, Richard spluttered, wiping his face with a napkin. I am your father. I am trying to protect you. He lied to us. No, Dad, Sarah stepped closer to him. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked only at him. He didn't make a fool of you. You did that yourself. He saved you. For 2 years, he saved you. He paid for this wedding so you could stand there and preen like a peacock. He paid your mortgage so you wouldn't be homeless. And how did you repay him? By calling him a loser in front of everyone we know. I didn't know, Richard whispered. He should have told me. So you could have used him. Sarah laughed, a bitter sound. If you knew he was worth millions, you wouldn't have treated him like a son. You would have treated him like an ATM. That's why he hid it. And you proved him right. Every single day, you proved him right. She reached up and unclasped the diamond necklace she was wearing, a family heirloom Richard had given her that morning with a speech about sterling legacy. She dropped it into his empty champagne glass. Clink. You talk about legacy, Sarah said. Your legacy is debt and arrogance. Mark's legacy is kindness. I know which one I'm choosing. She turned her back on him. She took my hand. Her grip was iron. Mark, she said, looking at me with eyes that shone with pride. Take me home. I think this party is over. Not quite yet, I said softly, holding her hand but looking at Richard. I stepped forward, closing the distance between Richard and myself. He flinched, expecting me to hit him. I adjusted my cufflinks. I didn't need violence. I had something much worse. Richard, I said, my voice low and professional. The voice of a CEO addressing a problematic employee. There is one last piece of business. What? He snarled, though there was no heat in it. Jason mentioned that Helix Ventures acquired Apex Logistics this morning, I said. As the majority shareholder, I have invoked a clause in the acquisition agreement. Immediate restructuring of senior management. Richard's eyes widened. You can't. I can. And I did. I pulled a plain white envelope from my tuxedo pocket. I had prepared it just in case. I placed it on the table next to the blue folder. This is a notice of administrative leave, pending a forensic audit of your expense accounts, I said. Your company credit cards have been deactivated as of 5 p.m. today. Your access to the building is revoked. You're firing me? Richard gasped. At my daughter's wedding? No, I smiled coldly. I'm not firing you. Firing you would trigger a severance package, and frankly, we can't afford to waste capital on dead weight. I'm demoting you. Demoting? We have an opening in the archive division, I said. Data entry. Basement level. It pays $40,000 a year. It's honest work. It's what you would call a loser job. But it comes with health insurance. I leaned in close, so only he could hear. You have a lot of debt, Richard. The Hamptons house. The car. The loans I bought. If you want to avoid bankruptcy, you're going to need a job. So, I expect to see you at the office on Monday. 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. I hate tardiness. I stood back. Now, get out of my wedding. Richard looked at the envelope. He looked at the crowd, who were staring at him with a mix of horror and schadenfreude. He looked at Sarah, who refused to meet his eyes. He grabbed the envelope. He didn't say a word. He turned and walked out of the ballroom, a solitary figure in a ruined suit, shrinking with every step until the heavy doors swallowed him whole. For a second, the room was silent. Then, Jason raised his glass again. To the happy couple. And the band began to play. 1 year later. The Hamptons' sun was warm, smelling of salt and wild roses. I sat on the deck of the beach house, watching the waves roll in. It was the same house Richard used to own. When the bank finally moved to foreclose on him, I bought it outright. Not to live in, it had too many bad ghosts, but as a vacation spot for our friends. Sarah walked out onto the deck, carrying 2 cold beers. She looked happier than I had ever seen her. The stress lines were gone. She was glowing. Jason just called, she said, handing me a beer and sitting on the railing. Oh. How's the quarterly report? Profits are up, she smiled. And he had an update on the archive division. How is our star employee? I asked, taking a sip. Richard is adjusting, she said, a hint of sadness in her voice, but mostly relief. Apparently, he tried to order an intern to get him coffee last week. The intern reminded him that he is the intern. Jason said he's actually getting quite good at filing. He's quiet. He does his work. Good, I nodded. Maybe he's finally learning the value of $1. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the ocean. Do you ever regret it? Sarah asked suddenly. Buying the company? Paying his debts? It cost you millions. I looked at her. I thought about the way she stood up to him at the wedding. I thought about the peace we had now. Money is just a tool, Sarah, I said. It can build things, or it can destroy things. Richard used it to build a cage. I used it to buy the key. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. I hadn't given it to her yet. Happy anniversary, I said. She opened it. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a simple, silver key. What is this? She asked. I sold the penthouse in the city, I said. And I bought that little farm upstate. The one with the apple orchard you liked. The one Richard said was for peasants. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. You bought the farm. I bought the farm, I smiled. I figured we could grow apples. Maybe sell them at a stand. Live like losers. She laughed, throwing her arms around my neck. I love you, Mark. I love you too, Sarah. We sat there as the sun went down, a billionaire and his wife, planning our future as apple farmers. Far away, in a basement office with no windows, Richard Sterling was likely clocking out for the day, wondering where it all went wrong. He would never understand. He thought net worth was a number. He never learned that true worth is what you have left when the numbers are gone.